in the jagged, dust-scarred mountains of Afghanistan, where empires have risen, broken, and vanished. Like smoke, echoes the story of two of the most powerful nations on earth, waging war against a people who refused to bend, refused to kneel, and refused to die. This is the story of a land that swallowed armies, a land where the Soviets marched in with tanks and ideology, believing they could reshape a culture older than their own nation, only to find themselves bleeding out beneath the unyielding peaks of the Hindu Kush. A land where, decades later, the most technologically advanced military force in human history, the United States, would enter with promises of liberation, democratization, and redemption, only to discover that Afghanistan was not a canvas for foreign dreams, but a graveyard for foreign plans. And within that land lived men, women, tribes, and fighters hardened by centuries of invasion and betrayal, who learned to fight not because they wanted war, but because war would not leave them. This script is not merely a story of battles and geopolitics. It is the story of how Afghanistan became the mirror in which the Soviet Empire cracked and in which American power stumbled, revealing truths about insurgency, resilience, and the limits of foreign intervention that the world still refuses to learn. It is a chronicle of sacrifice, strategy, devastation, and defiance, weaving two wars into one continuous epic of imperial ambition and Afghan resistance. To understand why both the Soviet Union and the United States failed in Afghanistan, one must first understand the land itself, a place that does not merely exist on a map, but dominates every life within it. Afghanistan is a country where mountains slice the sky with ancient defiance, where deserts stretch into horizons that swallow armies, and where tribal networks form webs of loyalty more unbreakable than steel. For centuries, outsiders have gazed upon this rugged terrain and mistaken it for backwardness when, in truth, it is a fortress shaped by time. The Afghan people, Pashtun, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, and dozens more, are bound not by a single uniform culture, but by a shared understanding that survival demands independence. Their history is a litany of invasions, from Alexander the Great to the Mongols, from the British Empire to the Soviets and Americans. Each invader arrived convinced that superior numbers, superior technology, or superior ideology could conquer the terrain and the people who lived upon it, each left with their pride shattered, realizing too late that Afghanistan cannot be ruled by those who do not understand its soul. Its mountains divide more than land, they divide empires, foreign strategies, and illusions of control. For Afghans, defending their homeland is not simply warfare, it is a sacred duty inherited from generations who fought before them. For outsiders, understanding this truth is the first step, but almost every empire that entered Afghanistan refused to take that step, believing instead that the Afghan will could be bent by force. By the late 1972, the Soviet Union viewed Afghanistan not as a sovereign nation with its own political rhythm, but as a strategic chess piece on the Cold War board. Moscow imagined Afghanistan as a buffer state, preventing Western influence from creeping toward the Soviet southern borders, and as a potential ideological partner that could expand socialism into South Asia. When internal tensions erupted within Afghanistan, triggered by the Saur Revolution of 1978, when the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, PDPA, seized power, the Soviets believed they saw an opportunity. But the PDPA, despite its Marxist ideals, was deeply divided, inexperienced, and catastrophically disconnected from the Afghan people, who viewed its rapid modernization programs as cultural assaults. Land reforms, women's rights initiatives, and attempts to suppress tribal authority, commendable in theory, were executed with reckless speed, backed by arrests, torture, and executions. Afghanistan erupted in rebellion almost instantly. The PDPA begged Moscow for help, painting all resistance as Western-sponsored counter-revolution. The Soviets, already anxious about losing influence, convinced themselves that intervention would stabilize the region in weeks, not years. What they failed to understand was that by sending troops across the Afghan border in December 1979, they were not simply entering a neighboring country, they were stepping into a historical trap. They believed they were supporting a friendly socialist government. In reality, they were igniting a national uprising that would unite Afghans across tribes, classes, and ideologies against them. And so began a war that would last nearly a decade, cost over 1 million Afghan lives, drain the Soviet economy, and contribute to the eventual collapse of the USSR itself. When Soviet tanks rolled into Kabul, the Kremlin expected shock, submission, and swift stabilization. Instead, they awakened a force far older and more powerful than any army. Afghan identity forged through resistance. Across the countryside, in valleys where families had lived for centuries, elders stood before young men and declared that defending the homeland was a religious obligation, a cultural necessity, and a matter of honor. The Mujahedin were not a single entity, but a constellation of factions: Islamist, nationalist, tribal, monarchist. Yet they shared one unbreakable agreement: no foreign power would rule Afghanistan. In remote villages, imams preached that jihad against the Soviets was not merely permissible, but obligatory. Tribes that had fought each other for generations suddenly found common cause, their rivalries overshadowed by the larger threat. Teenagers who had never left their villages took up rifles. Farmers exchanged plows for Kalashnikovs. Veterans of past civil conflicts joined new guerrilla fronts. The Mujahedin harnessed Afghanistan's brutal geography to their advantage, drawing Soviet troops into ambushes, disappearing into mountains, and striking where least expected. Meanwhile, civilians endured unspeakable suffering. Entire villages were bombed into dust, families forced to flee into Pakistan and Iran. But instead of breaking Afghan resolve, Soviet brutality hardened it. The more the Red Army escalated, the more determined the Mujahideen became. What Moscow interpreted as primitive defiance was in fact a deeply rooted cultural refusal to accept foreign domination, strengthened by religious conviction and generations of inherited memory. Afghanistan was not merely defending territory, it was defending its right to exist on its own terms. As the Mujahedin gained momentum, Afghanistan transformed from a local uprising into one of the largest proxy battlegrounds of the Cold War. The United States, seeing the Soviet invasion as an opportunity to weaken its greatest rival, launched Operation Cyclone, one of the longest, most expensive covert operations in CIA history. Billions of dollars in funding, weapons, and training flowed into Pakistan, which became the center of global jihadist mobilization. Saudi Arabia matched American financial contributions, but added its own ideological influence, spreading Wahhabi doctrine among Afghan fighters. Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, acted as the gatekeeper, deciding which Mujahedin factions received support. This often meant empowering Islamist groups at the expense of more moderate or nationalist factions. China, wary of Soviet expansion near its borders, also provided weaponry. Egypt, Britain, and others joined in, turning Afghanistan into a giant funnel of foreign resources aimed at bleeding the Soviet military. Yet while the world saw this as a strategic chess match, for Afghans on the ground it was a devastating escalation. Villages became battlegrounds for weapons testing. Fighters aligned with donors not because of ideology, but because they needed supplies to survive. The fragmentation of the Mujahedin was cemented by the very foreign assistance meant to strengthen them. Meanwhile, millions of Afghans fled to refugee camps where poverty, radicalization, and foreign agendas merged into a potent mix. The Soviet-Afghan War was no longer merely a conflict between occupier and occupied. It had become a crucible in which the modern jihadist movement was forged, and in which Afghanistan was being reshaped by the interests of nations far beyond its borders. Despite being one of the world's most formidable military forces, the Soviet army quickly discovered that Afghanistan nullified its advantages. Their tanks, designed for European plains, struggled on narrow mountain passes where avalanches, rock slides, and ambushes awaited them. Their aircraft dominated the skies, yet could not distinguish between fighters and civilians hiding in caves or scattered across harsh terrain. Their supply lines were constantly harassed by guerrilla raids. Their soldiers, many young conscripts from distant Soviet republics, found themselves fighting an enemy they barely understood in a climate that punished them relentlessly. Winter cold froze weapons. Summer heat baked armored vehicles until engines failed. Diseases spread through Soviet camps. Morale plummeted as soldiers witnessed endless casualties with no strategic progress. The Mujahedin fought unconventionally. Hit-and-run attacks, night raids, landmines, improvised traps, disappearing into mountains where Soviet troops dared not follow. The introduction of American Stinger missiles turned Soviet helicopters from their greatest advantage into vulnerable targets, further crippling morale. Soviet commanders, trained for conventional warfare, were forced into brutal tactics. Scorched earth operations, massacres, airstrikes on villages, suspected of harboring rebels. But every atrocity only strengthened the insurgency. The Soviets won many battles, but lost the war of legitimacy. Their technological superiority mattered less than the Mujahedin's ability to blend into the land itself. Afghanistan became a quagmire where no amount of force could secure lasting control. Behind every headline, every battlefield report, and every geopolitical analysis lay a staggering human cost, that reshaped Afghanistan for generations. Over 1 million Afghans, men, women, children were killed, many in bombings that reduced entire villages to rubble. Millions more were wounded, losing limbs, livelihoods, and futures. By the mid-1982s, Afghanistan held the grim distinction of being the world's largest producer of refugees. Families walked for days across unforgiving landscapes, carrying what little they could salvage, seeking safety in camps in Pakistan and Iran. Yet even in supposed refuge, they faced hunger, disease, and exploitation. Children grew up knowing only displacement and war. The social fabric of Afghanistan tribal authority, village life, traditional leadership was torn apart. Schools vanished. Farmland was destroyed. Entire generations lost access to education and healthcare. Meanwhile, Soviet soldiers returned home, traumatized, broken, and often unrecognized by their government. Mothers in Russia received sealed coffins and bureaucratic lies. The war was kept hidden from Soviet citizens, but its psychological damage spread quietly. In Afghanistan, the destruction of society created fertile ground for future conflict. As the Mujahedin fought heroically, they also endured internal disputes, corruption, and ideological splits. The war's brutality planted seeds of chaos that would later give rise to warlordism, civil war, and eventually the Taliban. The Soviet-Afghan War was not only a geopolitical disaster, it was a human catastrophe whose scars would shape Afghanistan's destiny long after the last Soviet tank crossed the border home. By the late 1982s, the Soviet Union was economically strained, politically destabilized, and socially exhausted. Mikhail Gorbachev, recognizing that Afghanistan had become an unwinnable war draining billions of rubles and costing countless lives, declared the conflict a bleeding wound. Yet withdrawing was not simple. It required admitting defeat, something nearly unthinkable for a global superpower. Over 2 years, the USSR attempted a face-saving exit, negotiating with Afghan factions while continuing to support the PDPA government. But neither diplomacy nor military pressure could reverse the tide. The Mujahedin controlled vast territories, their morale unshakable. Soviet troops, desperate to return home, fought merely to survive rather than to win. On the 15th of February 1989, the last Soviet soldier crossed the Friendship Bridge into Uzbekistan. The retreat was framed as an honorable conclusion, but the world saw it for what it was: a superpower humbled by a nation it underestimated. Just 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed entirely. Afghanistan had not been the sole cause, but the war accelerated economic decay, exposed political fractures, and shattered public faith in the Soviet system. The Afghan conflict was the hammer that cracked an already fragile empire. Yet while the Soviets left, their departure did not bring peace to Afghanistan. Instead, it opened the next chapter of tragedy: a civil war among Mujahedin factions, fueled by leftover weapons, foreign influence, and political ambition. After the Soviet withdrawal, Afghanistan did not celebrate peace. It spiraled into chaos. Mujahedin commanders who had once fought shoulder to shoulder against a common enemy now turned on each other, driven by ideology, tribal loyalties, and the desire to control Kabul. The civil war that erupted was brutal beyond measure, with rocket attacks, looting, warlord infighting, and atrocities committed against civilians. Cities were shattered, and the population, exhausted by nearly 2 decades of unending war, fell into despair. Out of this chaos emerged a movement that promised order, justice, and an end to corruption. The Taliban, originating from religious seminaries in Pakistan, led by Mullah Muhammad Omar and supported heavily by Pakistan's ISI, the Taliban grew rapidly by appealing to Afghans desperate for stability. Their ideology was harsh and puritanical, their methods uncompromising, yet many war-weary communities saw them as a lesser evil compared to lawless warlords. By 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Their rule was defined by strict interpretations of Sharia law, extreme gender restrictions, and brutal suppression of dissent. But they succeeded in establishing a form of order, one enforced through fear. Meanwhile, Osama bin Laden, expelled from Sudan, arrived in Afghanistan where the Taliban granted him sanctuary. This alliance would set the stage for the next great foreign intervention in Afghan history, one triggered by the events of September 11, 2001. The attacks of September 11th shook the United States with a force that reshaped the world. Nearly 3,000 people were killed, and the US vowed to destroy Al-Qaeda and the Taliban regime that sheltered them. In October 2001, American forces launched Operation Enduring Freedom. Unlike the Soviets, the United States did not initially invade with massed ground forces. Instead, CIA operatives, U.S. Special Forces, and air power supported the Northern Alliance and anti-Taliban coalition. Within weeks, the Taliban government collapsed, Kabul fell, and the world declared the mission a success. Yet beneath this victory lay the seeds of another long war. The US believed it could rebuild Afghanistan into a functioning democracy, eliminating terrorism through nation building. Billions flowed into the country, but corruption siphoned much of it away. Warlords were empowered. Promises of security failed to reach rural areas. The Taliban, far from being destroyed, retreated into Pakistan, regrouped, and prepared for insurgency. Afghanistan became, once again, a battlefield where foreign optimism collided with harsh reality. The US entered believing its power, technology, and experience would succeed where the Soviets failed. It did not yet understand that Afghanistan punishes those who underestimate its complexity. In the early months following the collapse of the Taliban government, the United States found itself buoyed by a sense of swift victory that blinded its leaders to the complexity of the environment they had stepped into. Washington believed it had achieved in weeks what the Soviet Union had failed to accomplish in nearly a decade: remove an entrenched Afghan regime and install a more favorable political order. The initial US strategy, crafted under urgency and fueled by the trauma of 9/11, focused on crushing Al-Qaeda and uprooting its networks. Yet after those immediate objectives, the mission drifted into ambitious nation-building without the careful consideration such a monumental task required. The Bush administration assumed that Afghans, freed from Taliban oppression, would enthusiastically adopt Western-style democracy and governance. But Afghanistan was not a blank slate. It was a nation deeply fragmented by ethnic divisions, warlord rivalries, cultural norms, and decades of trauma. The US empowered warlords who had bloodied the country during the Civil War, stitching temporary alliances that undermined hopes for long-term stability. It underestimated the depth of tribal loyalties, overestimated the loyalty of newly formed security forces, and failed to recognize that Taliban fighters had not disappeared. They had blended into rural communities, waiting for their moment to return. This illusion of early success led American policymakers to expand their goals beyond their grasp, transforming a short, targeted mission into a complex war of nation-building and counterinsurgency. While American military and political leaders focused on reconstructing Kabul, the Taliban were quietly rebuilding their momentum across the border in Pakistan, unseen, underestimated, and unbroken. Pakistan's tribal regions became a sanctuary for former Taliban commanders, fighters, and ideologues who slipped away during the US-led invasion. The Pakistani military and intelligence services, especially the ISI, permitted this resurgence for strategic reasons. To them, the Taliban were not vanquished extremists, but useful assets for maintaining influence in Afghanistan, preventing Indian expansion, and preserving strategic depth along their western border. In these border areas, Quetta, North Waziristan, South Waziristan Taliban leaders rebuilt their chain of command. They re-established training camps, hardened their ideological foundations, recruited new fighters, and studied American and NATO tactics. While US forces believed the Taliban had been defeated, the insurgency was quietly evolving into a more organized, patient, and sophisticated movement. It drew upon sympathetic madrasas, tribal loyalties, and grievances against the corrupt new Afghan government. Many Afghans who felt marginalized by the new order, especially in the Pashtun South, began to view the Taliban not as remnants of a fallen regime, but as a force capable of restoring justice in a system increasingly defined by bribery, inequality, and foreign presence. By 2004, attacks across southern Afghanistan had risen sharply. The Taliban, once declared finished, were preparing to return, and this time they would fight a war of attrition rather than a conventional battle for control. One of the most devastating blows to the American mission was not a battle lost on the field, but a battle lost within the halls of the Afghan government. When the US helped establish a new political system, it unintentionally created an elite class whose power depended on foreign money rather than popular legitimacy. Corruption seeped into every layer of Afghan society, from the lowest checkpoint to the highest ministries. Police officers demanded bribes at roadblocks. Judges sold verdicts to the highest bidder. Politicians looted development funds meant for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. International aid poured in, but instead of rebuilding Afghanistan, much of it fed networks of patronage and personal enrichment. This corruption alienated ordinary Afghans who had hoped for stability, but instead saw a new regime that felt even more predatory than the Taliban. For many villagers, the Afghan state became synonymous with humiliation and extortion. The Taliban exploited these grievances with ruthless effectiveness. They offered swift and consistent justice through shadow courts, settling disputes in hours instead of months. They punished corrupt officials where the government turned a blind eye. As a result, many communities, especially in rural areas, began to view the Taliban not as insurgents, but as a lesser evil compared to a government seen as illegitimate, dysfunctional, and aligned with foreign occupiers. This crisis of legitimacy would haunt the Afghan state until its very final day. As the insurgency expanded across southern and eastern Afghanistan, the United States called upon its NATO allies for reinforcements. Soon, troops from Britain, Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, France, and dozens of other nations arrived under the banner of the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF. What had begun as a US-led anti-terror operation transformed into a vast multinational mission with broad mandates and conflicting strategies. Some NATO forces emphasized reconstruction and humanitarian projects, while others engaged in aggressive counterinsurgency operations. This lack of unified vision created confusion on the ground. Meanwhile, the Taliban adapted with remarkable resilience. They shifted from direct confrontations to roadside bombs, ambushes, assassinations, and targeted attacks on foreign convoys. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, became their signature weapon, devastating NATO troops and Afghan civilians alike. The US responded with airstrikes, surveillance technologies, and special forces raids. But each mistaken bombing that killed civilians, each night raid that entered a home uninvited, fueled resentment and strengthened Taliban propaganda. A vicious cycle took shape. Insurgent attacks led to foreign military escalation, which led to civilian casualties, which led to more recruits for the insurgency. By 2007, Afghanistan was no longer a stabilized state, but an active war zone spreading across provinces previously considered secure. NATO, despite its advanced technology, found itself trapped in the same labyrinth that had ensnared the Soviets decades earlier. To outsiders, Afghanistan's rural villages seemed isolated, impoverished, and vulnerable. But in reality, they formed a social ecosystem far stronger and more complex than US or NATO planners anticipated. These communities operated according to deeply rooted traditions, local councils, jirgas, tribal codes of honor, and kinship networks that had functioned for centuries. When foreign forces arrived, they often attempted to impose centralized governance on regions that historically governed themselves. The United States tried to establish district governors, police forces, and development committees in places where local elders already held authority. This created tension and, in many cases, outright rejection. The Taliban understood these rural dynamics intimately. They were part of them. They recruited from within these communities, lived in their villages, and blended into their landscapes. Their presence was not always welcomed, but often tolerated, especially when they provided protection from corrupt government officials or abusive warlords. Meanwhile, the US struggled to build trust in areas where foreign uniforms symbolized occupation to many Afghans. Rural society, with its self-sufficiency and historical memory, proved nearly impossible to control or reshape. It was here, in the remote villages far from Kabul, that the fate of the war would ultimately be decided. For no matter how many cities the US secured control of, Afghanistan's heartland rested in the countryside. By 2009, the situation had deteriorated so severely that President Barack Obama authorized a massive troop surge, sending more than 30,000 additional US soldiers into Afghanistan. His goal was to reverse Taliban momentum, secure key regions, and strengthen Afghan governance enough to allow eventual withdrawal. The surge focused heavily on Helmand and Kandahar, the Taliban heartlands. US Marines fought fierce battles in towns like Marja and Sangin, where every compound had become a fortress and every irrigation canal a defensive line. The Taliban, knowing the Americans would eventually leave, fought with time on their side. They planted IEDs so densely that progress slowed to a crawl. The surge succeeded in clearing some areas, but holding them proved far more difficult. As soon as US forces withdrew from a district, Taliban fighters returned, often with the support or silent approval of local residents. Meanwhile, Afghan government corruption persisted, undermining US efforts. Although Obama's surge inflicted heavy losses on the Taliban, it failed to break their strategic will. They simply retreated, regrouped, and waited, confident that international forces could not sustain a long-term occupation. The surge brought time but not victory. Central to the American mission was the creation of a strong Afghan National Army, ANA, and Afghan National Police, ANP. Billions were invested in training, equipping, and expanding these forces. On paper, the ANA grew into a sizable army with modern rifles, armored vehicles, and air support. But beneath the surface lay crippling weaknesses. Corruption was rampant. Commanders inflated troop numbers to receive extra salaries and supplies. Desertion rates were high. Many soldiers were loyal not to the Afghan state, but to local power brokers, ethnic factions, or tribal networks. Illiteracy hindered training. Drug addiction was common. Some units fought bravely, others collapsed under pressure. The police force was even more problematic, infamous for extortion, abuse, and incompetence. These failures were not simply due to Afghan shortcomings, they reflected the unrealistic expectations of foreign planners who tried to build a Western-style army in a nation with minimal infrastructure, fractured politics, and a population weary of centralized authority. Meanwhile, the Taliban exploited these weaknesses by infiltrating units, gathering intelligence, and launching insider attacks that eroded trust between Afghan and NATO forces. Political attention shifted, media coverage waned, and Afghanistan's fragile institutions were left struggling to survive without consistent support. This vacuum enabled the Taliban to rebuild stronger than ever. While US forces fought insurgents in Fallujah and Baghdad, the Taliban expanded their influence in Kandahar, Helmand, Uruzgan, and Kunar. Afghan government corruption deepened. Reconstruction projects slowed or failed. The window of opportunity to build a stable Afghanistan present in the early 2000s began to close. The war in Iraq did not merely distract Washington, it damaged US credibility throughout the region, emboldening insurgents who saw American capacity stretched thin. The Taliban seized this moment with calculated precision. Had Afghanistan remained the central focus of US strategy, the trajectory of the war might have been radically different. Instead, the decision to invade Iraq opened the door for the Taliban's resurgence and prolonged the conflict for 2 more decades. As the war intensified, the US parent and NATO relied increasingly on air power, night raids, artillery, and drone strikes. These tactics, while effective against insurgents, came with a devastating cost: civilian lives. Entire families were wiped out when airstrikes targeted homes believed to harbor militants. Wedding parties were bombed due to faulty intelligence. Night raids terrorized rural communities, with soldiers entering homes in violation of cultural norms, often detaining or killing the wrong individuals. Each mistake fueled rage and grief that the Taliban capitalized on. Propaganda teams traveled from village to village, showing images of destroyed homes and dead children, framing the foreign presence as an occupation intent on destroying Afghan culture. Meanwhile, apologies from NATO commanders meant little to families who had lost everything. With each civilian death, the legitimacy of the foreign mission eroded further. The Taliban understood that winning hearts and minds was just as important as winning battles. The US, despite its resources, struggled to understand that civilian casualties were not merely tragic side effects. They were the very fuel that sustained the insurgency. By 2010, many rural Afghans no longer believed the US was there to protect them. They saw a foreign force whose power often came at the cost of innocent lives, allowing the Taliban to portray themselves as defenders against foreign aggression. As the dust settles on 4 decades of conflict, Afghanistan stands as a haunting monument to the rise and fall of global powers, a land where two superpowers, the Soviet Union in the 1982nd and the United States in the 2000s, arrived with the confidence of empires, believing they could reshape a nation with sheer force, modern machinery, and political ambition, only to discover that Afghanistan is a place where the mountains remember every invader, where history buries foreign armies under the weight of their own miscalculations, and where the people, hardened by centuries of struggle, refuse to bow to any external will. And as we look back on this tragic arc of history, from the Red Army tanks rolling through the Khyber Pass to the Black Hawk helicopters circling above Kabul, from the CIA-backed Mujahedin fighting in rugged valleys to the later Taliban fighters reclaiming territory inch by inch, we see a repeating cycle of intervention, resistance, withdrawal, and collapse, a cycle that leaves behind shattered cities, broken families, and a country forever caught between hope and devastation, reminding the world that war is not a chessboard, nations are not pawns, and foreign powers, even the most technologically advanced, cannot extinguish a people's identity nor force a culture to evolve according to outside desires. And so the Afghan story ends, not with victory or defeat, but the Afghan people themselves, scarred, burdened, yet unbroken, standing as living proof that the human spirit, even under the weight of the world's most powerful military machines, can endure beyond all expectations, lighting a small flame of resilience that refuses to die. No matter how dark the night becomes, no matter how many superpowers fall before it, no matter how many times history tries to repeat itself. Since the Taliban returned to power in August 2021, Afghanistan's political and social environment has been dominated by the group's strict interpretation of Islamic law and authoritarian governance. Afghanistan faces one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises, driven by economic collapse, climate shocks, conflict legacies, and shrinking international aid. An estimated around 23 million people, over half the population, now require humanitarian assistance. Millions lack access to clean water, healthcare, basic services, and food security remains acute. Some 10 million people face acute food insecurity, and 3.5 million children are severely malnourished. These conditions stem from weak local production, poor harvests, droughts, and reduced foreign aid since 2021, creating a perfect storm of hunger and deprivation. The security situation is unstable. Despite formal cessation of large-scale war with international forces, violence, crime, and intergroup clashes continue, especially in rural regions where economic pressure and factional rivalries remain strong. This instability contributes to ongoing displacement and chronic insecurity across many provinces. Afghan culture is deeply rooted in centuries-old traditions: language diversity, Pashto, Dari, music, poetry, hospitality, and tribal loyalties. Despite political shifts, many cultural norms, family honor, community bonds, and local council jirga systems remain central to everyday life. Traditional crafts, storytelling, and poetry continue to be important cultural expressions. However, civil liberties and personal freedoms have significantly contracted under the Taliban. Women and girls face some of the most severe restrictions in the world. They are banned from secondary and university education, excluded from most employment sectors, and restricted in movement and public life, severely affecting half the population's ability to participate in society. Cultural expression, especially anything perceived as Western, can be risky. For example, young men were detained for wearing fashion inspired by a British TV show, highlighting how moral policing and control over cultural expression affect individuals' daily lives. Despite these restrictions, many Afghans demonstrate resilience and adaptability. Some community groups quietly preserve educational efforts, promote local peace, or provide support services, especially in provinces less directly controlled by central authorities. Afghanistan's economy is deeply fragile. Official data show modest GDP growth of around 2.7% in 2023-2024. But this expansion is insufficient to address widespread poverty, unemployment, and food insecurity. Recovery remains uneven and heavily reliant on imports and foreign assistance. Afghanistan remains highly dependent on foreign aid for health, food distribution, and disaster response. Cuts or pauses in assistance, such as recent funding disruptions, have directly worsened access to healthcare and food security. Border closures and trade disruptions, for example, closures with Pakistan affecting trade and livelihoods, further compound economic stress, reducing jobs and market access for goods. Despite immense hardship, Afghan society continues to show resilience. Many families adapt through subsistence farming, community support systems, and informal enterprises. Youth advocates are emerging, seeking peace and education amidst adversity. There are also voices within the country calling for change, and subtle shifts in local norms are emerging despite the restrictive political environment. These changes reflect an underlying desire for stability and progress, even under difficult circumstances. Afghanistan in 2025, a country facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. A society with deep traditional culture, social resilience, but constrained freedoms. An economy that shows modest growth but severe poverty, unemployment, and food insecurity. A place where educational systems struggle, especially for girls. A nation whose future depends on humanitarian relief, inclusive policies, economic revitalization, and opportunities for youth. Afghanistan in 2025 remains one of the most fragile and complex environments worldwide. The country continues to struggle under the rule of the Taliban government, which returned to power in August 2021 after the withdrawal of US and NATO forces. The political order is highly authoritarian, and governance is tightly controlled by Taliban authorities without broad international recognition. The humanitarian situation remains dire, with millions of people facing ongoing hardship due to economic contraction, food insecurity, limited services, and restricted freedoms, especially for women and girls. A large share of the population requires consistent emergency assistance. Aid flows remain precarious and conditional on political and human rights concerns. Civil liberties, especially for women and girls, remain significantly restricted. While major frontline combat with foreign armies has ended, internal conflict, crime, and insurgent threats persist. Millions of people face chronic hunger. In some provinces, families go days without adequate meals. Seasonal droughts have further undermined agricultural production. Primary education for boys is permitted in many areas, but attendance is low due to poverty and instability. Women are largely barred from formal employment outside a very limited set of health and humanitarian